Okay, perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone to those people who have arrived so far and those who are continuing to arrive. Welcome to KCL Space's Speaker Talk event. And we're lucky to have you here. And we have a wonderful speaker with us today. His name's George, and I'll let him introduce himself in a minute. But he'll be giving us a talk on his career and his career progression through NASA, SpaceX, and what he's doing at the moment as well. You guys will have the opportunity to ask him any questions you have regarding his career or anything at all. Just put them on the chat. The committee will be monitoring the chat continuously throughout the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, you will have the chance to ask them yourselves, or the committee can ask them for you. If we run out of time, we will ask the questions to him on your behalf, and we'll let you know later on. But I hope that sounds all right. And as usual, if you have any questions, just write them on the chat. Or if you're having any issues as well, someone will help you. Okay, so we're going to start with the presentation now. But before that, George, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to, have the opportunity to speak with y'all. My name is Jorge Arturo Levario-Delagarza, and I'm currently an intern at SpaceX, and I'll talk a little bit about my career so far and just a little bit about me. So yeah, pleasure speaking with y'all.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share the presentation now. So just let me know when you guys can see it. And just let me know when it's time to move the presentation.
Okay, sweet. All right. Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to King's College London. And I know the UK is doing a lot for ESA. I believe, y'all had, England had its first para astronaut, and, they had an astronaut selected, or they had an astronaut selected as a career astronaut, another one selected as a astronaut reservist, a reserve astronaut. So I know there's a lot that the United Kingdom is contributing to space. So without further ado, like I mentioned, I will talk about myself. I'll talk about my previous experience. So yeah, if we could go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit about my personal background. I am originally from El Paso, Texas. So it's a city that's right on the border between the United States and Mexico. So I actually did grow up in Mexico for a few years. But then ultimately, I did end up living most of my life in Dallas, Texas, or really Arlington, Texas. Dallas is just a big city nearby. And I grew up there, from elementary school all the way to university. And then from there, I moved to Houston whenever I had my internship at NASA. And now currently I'm actually living in Los Angeles, California. So just to provide context, Los Angeles is probably about 2,000 kilometers away from Dallas and Houston. So yeah, next slide, please. So a bit more about me. I am pretty adventurous, so I do have many hobbies. So I love hiking. I love cycling. I love roller skating. I like football or soccer. I guess I know there's a big hot topic as to what it's really called with the World Cup going on right now. I also have recently gotten into climbing a lot. I'm a big Rubik's Cube fan. And that picture you see right there in the top right corner with me with the goggles on is actually community emergency response training. So I am also a part of that unit. And I've learned basic skills on, how to put out fires and, how to conduct search and rescue operations, as well as basic medical care. So yeah, so if we can go to the next slide, please, just to talk more about what got me into space originally. So that picture that you see on the left-hand side of the screen is actually a picture of my grandfather's living room in Mexico. So my grandfather was, he was a NASA enthusiast, because before SpaceX and all these other startups were around, the only way to get to space was through NASA. So, he had pictures of shuttle, of the Apollo 13, as you can see there, of the cockpit, of the mission patches, etc. So the idea of NASA, and what it was, I learned it from him. And, he wasn't actually an engineer. He was, he sold car parts, and then he sold aviation parts. But his passion for NASA, I could definitely say that I inherited it from him. And, I didn't really know much. Like, I knew what NASA was, but I couldn't really connect the dots until I was in college. I remember my freshman year when Falcon Heavy launched, had its very first launch, and they deployed the Tesla Roadster. And they had the two Falcon 9 boosters, as you can see, landing at the same time. So that definitely, I was actually working through an engineering problem as that was happening. And I remember I was struggling to get the units to cancel out. And, just seeing SpaceX pull that off absolutely mesmerized me. And I found out that same year that, 12 people had actually been to the moon. So I already knew that, but I actually didn't know that no one had actually ever been to Mars. And, to the date, no one has actually still been to Mars yet. There hasn't been a human mission to go to Mars. So those questions are questions I really wanted to answer. So that's what originally drove me to, become very passionate about space. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'll talk more about my educational journey. So I am currently attending the University of Texas at Arlington. So Texas, just for context, is in the southern central part of the United States. So, that's our wonderful campus. I am majoring in mechanical engineering and I am minoring in biomedical engineering. So to talk a little bit more about that, please, if we go to the next slide. So just what exactly is biomedical engineering? So basically, it's just a combination of, biology and engineering applied into medical. And so there are many different fields within biology, like you have prosthesis, medical devices, even human spaceflight, of course, is a big biomedical engineering challenge. Like, how do we keep humans alive during deep space explorations? And, how do we keep them alive in environments where they're not supposed to be alive? So, if you love math and if you can't pick between a doctor and engineer, biomedical is kind of a good hybrid between that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So why did I originally select biomedical engineering? So again, when I was in high school, I wasn't super into engineering, but I was a big fan and a big soccer player. I loved playing soccer, and my senior year of high school, unfortunately, I tore my ACL. So, I did the whole thing. I had surgery. I did the rehab. And, during those 10 months, I actually got to interface with doctors, with physios, with physical therapists. And I learned a lot of, the combination of when engineers and scientists and doctors all work together. So I couldn't really decide whether I wanted to be an engineer or a doctor. But what I did know was that I wanted to make a very direct impact on an individual's life. So, I thought mechanical engineering, like, for example, when I was in high school, I thought mechanical engineers made cars. I thought aerospace engineers made airplanes, and they had less of a direct impact, versus a prosthetic, that has a very direct impact on one individual. And I know for me, like the biomedical engineers and the doctors that worked to help me complete my whole recovery, definitely did change my life. So that's why I went into the field. But if we can go to the next slide, please. I am also dual majoring in mechanical engineering. So, just briefly, what is mechanical engineering? It's basically just the field that combines, design, building, and testing for anything that moves. So everything from submarines to rovers to space shuttles to automobiles to, rockets, robotics, and pretty much everything that moves was built by mechanical engineers. So if we go to the next slide, please, just to highlight why did I originally select mechanical engineering. I attended a national conference for SHPE SHIP, which I'll talk about more here in just a second. But I saw the opportunities that mechanical engineers were in biomedical engineering fields, because I originally went to the convention as just a biomedical engineer, but I saw, companies like Medtronic and Stryker were hiring mechanical engineers for biomedical engineering jobs. So I didn't really want to narrow myself down to just medical applications. I wanted a broader understanding of engineering. And I wanted more opportunities. Even space was something that I was learning about, and it's something that maybe if I ever got the chance, I think mechanical engineering would give me the opportunity to do that. So that's why I also selected to major in mechanical engineering. So if we go to the next slide, please. I do want to briefly talk about my prior non-technical work experience. So if we go to the next slide, please. I'll start out by just highlighting, I didn't always work at NASA. I didn't always work at SpaceX. Before that, I actually worked a lot in customer service. So I worked at Brahms, which is an ice cream chain. I worked selling knives at one point at Vector Marketing, and at Chipotle, which is a restaurant. I will say that I actually did learn lots of valuable skills, such as, shelf life. Like food has, a certain amount of time that it can be frozen before it expires, essentially. So, and one thing I do want to highlight is that through these jobs, I actually got more opportunities out of them than I had originally expected. So for Chipotle, for example, it actually helped me pay for my first 2 years of college tuition, because I dug into their like rules and their constitution and their benefits, and they actually had tuition reimbursement for college students or anyone pursuing an education. So that was something that I didn't originally sign up for, but that's an opportunity that I got just by reading it. So um, that was a plus there. And then also I was an Uber driver as well. And during this time, something that I didn't expect was that I would actually begin to learn a lot about space, about exploration, because it was during this time where I would be Uber driving for 12, 13, 14 hours, where I would listen to audiobooks and I would learn about NASA, because I listened to many different biographies of various astronauts, of flight controllers of the agency. I learned a lot about Elon Musk. I learned about, just many different people like who dared to explore, like Ernest Shackleton, the first man to cross the Antarctic or lead a voyage through the Antarctic, and Charles Lindbergh, the first man to cross the Atlantic Ocean. So this Uber job that I had, it was it was somewhat of a pressured job, because people sometimes have unrealistic expectations of when they need to make it to the airport, because they're running late, and sometimes the GPS, like, it would not work, so I would have to route my way, and I had to figure out a way to solve the problem because I had someone in my vehicle. So these are things things that I learned a lot in the customer service industry and how to talk to people. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'll talk about my work experience in my university's College of Engineering. So I was a teaching assistant, and I learned basically how to explain technical jargon into simple terms, because I was a teaching assistant for a freshman level engineering class. So I mentored many students, and this was a predominantly heavy in-person attendance class. So whenever we transitioned to COVID, it definitely did bring a lot of opportunity for improvement. How do we navigate through that change? And working in my College of Engineering, it helped me qualify for grants and scholarships. And again, this wasn't something that I was expecting out of this job, but it's something that did happen. So again, there was another opportunity there. So now if we could go to the next slide, please. I want to talk about my leadership experience that I accumulated in university, because ultimately the leadership experience is what has helped me land my opportunities. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'll talk about the rover team. So in this rover team, I originally joined just to learn about 3D printing, soldering, computer aided design, machining, because I didn't really have access to a 3D printer, and I wanted to learn technical skills. And the rover team gave me that opportunity because it was an organization that allowed me to fumble with hardware. And making a mistake on the rover's budget is not the same as making the mistake on NASA or SpaceX's budget. So how did I when I first joined, how did I ultimately become super involved, was because On the first day I was there, I joined during COVID, so there wasn't really much going on. But I made an effort to go to the lab when I could. I attended meetings, I attended work days as consistently as I could, and eventually, when the opportunity arose to become a lead, the lead did ask me if I wanted to be a co-lead on the mechanical arm team. So I did. Um, I learned, I got the opportunity to design the end effector and the sample return unit. And eventually, when the need arose again, the chief engineer asked me if I wanted to essentially be his replacement. And of course, I said yes. And of course, like, I do want to emphasize that I didn't join the rover team to, become the chief engineer. I joined the rover team to learn and doing the little things like attending every single meeting that I could, and working on my projects, and trying to be a team member that contributes and tries their best to add value is ultimately what gave me these opportunities. So just for context, rover team competes in the University Rover Challenge, which is actually an annual worldwide competition. So if King's College of London has a rover team, y'all could also participate in this same competition. So during the year that I was chief engineer, we were one of 15 out of 88 schools worldwide had qualified for the competition. So that was very exciting. And, it gave me an opportunity to really learn a lot about robotics. And, ultimately, as you'll find out later, it gave me the opportunity to land the internships that I have. So we can go to the next slide, please. Another organization that's helped me a lot is the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. So this is an organization that's basically devoted to promoting minorities in STEM fields, and reaching out to the local community, fostering minority leaders. And I joined this organization to professionally develop. I joined to be able to meet mentors, and of course make an impact in my local community. So again, doing the little things like attending meetings, volunteering for events. I attended a few national conferences, which were really game changers for me, and that's where I met my mentor, who eventually helped me get my first internship at Lockheed. So, through doing the little things like, picking up the food and, picking up after other people at the end of events, eventually gave me the opportunity to, lead as community outreach director, vice president, and eventually president. And then SHIP, which is what the acronym is, it operates at a local level. So like at the University of Texas at Arlington level, like different universities have their own SHIP chapter. And then at a regional level, just to provide context, the United States has 50 states, and the region that we're a part of has 7 states in that region. So I served as a vice regional student representative. And, through my service, I was recognized as the Outstanding Leadership Undergraduate Award 2022 from the region. So again, this organization definitely, with the people I met, helped me learn a lot. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I do want to talk about, or I guess the reason y'all reached out to me in the first place. How did I turn my space dreams into a reality? How did I actually make all this happen, coming from, being a first generation student? I grew up in a foreign country for a bit before moving to the United States. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'll talk about the internships I've had so far and how I got them. So, I'll talk about Lockheed Martin. So how did I end up here after 4 years of no internships? So just to provide more context, I did originally, I graduated high school and joined university in 2017. And it actually took me 4 years before I ever got my first internship. So my university has a college work experience program, and basically my university hires Lockheed Martin hires a lot of people from my university. So that definitely is a program that I looked into that played in my favor. So basically, instead of competing with an external pool of applicants applying from everywhere, basically this program whenever a need arises with Lockheed Martin Missiles and Fire Control, they look at this pool of UT Arlington students. So I got an email in May of last year, 2021, if I wanted an intern or if I wanted to do an interview with Lockheed. So I did. And, from joining SHIP, and I met a mentor there who actually works at Lockheed. So I reached out to her, and I was very fortunate that I went to that conference and I met her. And, she helped me prepare for the interview. She gave me a couple mock interviews. She told me what kind of questions to expect and what to look out for. So the interview was very behavioral. Tell me about yourself. How would you solve this problem? How do you deal with a difficult person? How would you, how do you manage your time? Why do you want to work at Lockheed? What's your biggest weakness? So they asked me those types of questions. And ultimately, after the interview, I did end up getting the offer 2 weeks later. And so I guess what really matters is, how did I stand out? So in retrospect, what aspects helped me stand out in this interview with Lockheed? When I was interviewing, I think against 12 other people to my knowledge, and I think I was the only person that got the offer. So I believe what helped out was, before my interview, I emailed the hiring manager. I emailed him my portfolio, which is basically just an extension of your resume. I emailed the portfolio, and I also, I did my research, and I learned that Lockheed Martin values full spectrum leadership. So I learned about a little bit, what does the company value? So I learned about that. And whenever I mentioned that, and whenever I sent him my portfolio, whenever it was my first week there, he told me that he really liked the portfolio. He asked me to print out 10 copies of those so I could introduce myself to other team members. So that's what I believe helped me. So we can go to the next slide, please, just to kind of briefly talk about what I did at Lockheed Martin. So I was a reliability and safety systems engineer on the HIMARS, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. And are you able to play that video? If not, it's fine, but just wanted to check.
I can try.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, sweet. Yeah, just.
No.
Okay, no, that's fine. So I can just talk through what I did. So basically the video was going to show you a launcher firing missiles. So I did a lot of reliability work and safety work on that launcher. So yeah, if we could go to the next slide, please.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah, I see it.
I'm trying to see if I can access the. Oh, there we go. I got some. Can you guys see it? Can you guys see it? Or can you only hear it?
I don't think the video is playing.
Can you see the video though?
I can see like an image, but I don't know. Are you playing the video, or is it just?
I just paused it just to ask you guys if you can see it. I'm gonna play it. If you guys can't see it, just stop me.
Not playing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. We can honestly just move on to the next slide. The video is just going to show you a launcher firing missiles, and you can find it on YouTube. So I don't really have any issue if we don't play the video.
Yeah, what we'll do is that we'll add the video to the chat. I can find it and add it to the chat. People can see it later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back to the presentation. Okay, can you see the presentation again?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, sweet. All right. Well, I guess I'll talk about, how did I make NASA happen? So like growing up, like I told you, like I didn't really like I knew what NASA was because of my grandfather, but I had a very vague concept. And once I became an engineering student, I had a much better concept of what NASA was. But again, like NASA always seemed like a very far-fetched dream of mine. So I can tell you that having a LinkedIn premium membership and following many people that work at NASA allowed the NASA opening to actually appear on my newsfeed. So um, I saw the announcement, and the announcement had pretty much described, hey, this is, we're looking for, someone that has computer aided design experience, someone who's prototyped, who's 3D printed, um, who has testing experience. So, I thought to myself, I fit all the descriptions. And then the announcement said at the bottom, if you're interested, please send me your resume to my LinkedIn. So I did that. So I messaged the guy and I sent him not only my resume, but my portfolio as well. And I sent him that. This was like Saturday at midnight, studying for a heat transfer exam to provide context. And I didn't hear back from him. And then all of a sudden, Monday morning, I get an email saying that I had been selected for a NASA interview. And it was actually a group interview. So it was 10 people in this group. And to my knowledge, I think they had like 3 or 4 groups of 10 people. So, how was the interview? So flash forward 3 days later, I had never done a group interview before. So I just kind of did a little bit of research as to what to do. And the big thing I learned about group interviews is definitely, don't try to be the person who stands out above and beyond. Just try to be the person that highlights and makes others around you better. So one thing I did leading up to their interview was I saw the other emails in the group interview. So I saw the other people that I would interview. So I tried to learn a little bit about them. So, I just found them on LinkedIn if I could. I couldn't find everyone, but I found as many people as I could. And essentially, I found as many people as I could. And I learned about them. So I learned, at least 3 of them had prior NASA experience. So I try to highlight, the good of each person. So, the first question they asked me, tell me about yourself. So, I got to listen to how amazing 10 people are. So that was a little bit intimidating. And then they asked, why do you want to work for NASA? And what's your biggest weakness? And I believe this question is definitely one that played in my favor because my answer was completely different from everyone else's answer. So I believe I was the 8th person out of 10 people to answer this. And, everyone says, why do you want to work at NASA? And everyone says the same thing, NASA, is a cutting edge, it's history, the final frontier. And then when they asked me, why do you want to work for NASA? I gave them a very different answer. So I told them, within my university, we have very little people that actually work for NASA. And within my organization in the rover team, as well as SHIP, to my knowledge, we hadn't had anyone who had worked at NASA before. So serving as an ambassador between NASA and my university is the reason why I want to work here and being able to promote NASA opportunities and get more people in my university to work at NASA. So that's ultimately how I answered the question. And then they asked me, what's my biggest weakness? And, I told them that my biggest weakness was attention to detail. Like for example, the example I always use is, commenting code on MATLAB. Because it's something that you have to do, but getting lost in the details can, sometimes not allow me to provide my most efficient work. And then after that, the questions actually got pretty crazy. It almost felt like Russian roulette at times because the questions they asked were, this is a question and give me 90 seconds and text me your answer. So the questions were like, how many things can you do with a paper clip in 90 seconds? Text me your answer, go. Or how many phones can you stack from the floor to the ceiling? So, the way I answered that one was More than anything, I just provided a lot of assumptions, like, the phone is flat, the phone doesn't have a case, the room is X tall, the phone is X thick, and then, you do the math, blah, blah, blah. So it was more of a critical thinking question. And then I don't know if the interviewer did it just to add some stress, but he was like, one of y'all came very close to getting the right answer, and I texted you if you're that person. And he didn't text me, so I was a little bit worried. And then he put us in groups of like 2 to 3 people, and we had to present to them what they do. So they do the fractional thermal runway calorimetry team. We essentially had to give a 90-second presentation of what they do. So that was essentially how the interview went. And at the very end, he asked us, provide feedback on your team members, and and even had the audacity to even time it, like, you have 60 seconds, go. And I thought, like, that was actually a very difficult question, because like, what kind of feedback do you want to provide? So I just thought, just be very fair and honest, because because at the same time, my feedback could potentially rule someone out of reaching their NASA dream. So I was very honest. So I highlighted the good things about each partner, because I already knew who my partners were, and because I had already done my research on them. So I knew one of them had worked at NASA. And whenever we answered the question, or whenever we did the presentation, the 90-second presentation to them, both of them were very technically sound on what the lithium ion batteries were. So I played the role of secretary. So I took notes of what everything was saying. I try to like organize the logistics of how we're going to present, because they were doing very good on answering the technical part. So whenever I provided the feedback, I made sure to mention that they were both very technically sound. And ultimately, he told us at the end that 2 of y'all will hear back from me to get a second interview. So you'll hear back from me later today. So I thought to myself, I gave it my best effort, but I didn't really expect much. But then, 2 hours later, I get a text saying if I was ready for a second interview. And this second interview was actually it was more direct. So it was one-on-one for about an hour and a half. So my interviewer actually really got to know me. We talked a lot about the rover team, more than my experience at Lockheed and more than my experience at SHIP. He was very interested in what I did for the rover team. So, and he did mention that he liked the way I answered the second question as to why I want to work for NASA and what's my biggest weakness. He did mention that was a particularly good answer that I provided. So ultimately, he told me, the next day you'll get a call from us whether you got the offer or not. So I waited. He said that they would call me at noon, and noon came. He didn't call me, so I just kind of didn't really think much about it. Just tried not to think about it. And then I get a call at 4:30, and it's actually an offer, but it's from Boeing, because I had interviewed with them like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I had forgotten about it. And I guess I was excited, but I wasn't super excited. As amazing as a company Boeing is, I was really thinking a lot about NASA. So 30 minutes passed by, and then I get a call from Houston. And of course, I got the call, I got the offer, and I was actually in Orlando, Florida. And just to provide context, Orlando, Florida is 2,000 kilometers away from Arlington, Texas, where I live. So I was not home when I got the call. I was away from home. Orlando, Florida is an hour away from the Kennedy Space Center, where they actually do the launches. Crew 3 had actually launched 2 days before I got the offer. And I actually had planned a trip to go to the Kennedy Space Center the following day. But I definitely didn't plan to get a NASA offer before that. So that was like a good, pleasant surprise. How did I stand out? So I would say sending in my portfolio initially, I would say helped me get the interview. But then the way I answered the questions of, trying to be different, highlighting other people's strengths as opposed to my own strengths. And, the way I answered the question of, why do you want to work here, which was very different. And of course, also one thing I do want to emphasize is I was able to prove leadership in 2 different organizations. So the rover team, as well as the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. Those 2 organizations are not linked with each other, but at the time I was vice president of SHIP, and at the same time I was chief engineer of the rover team. So those are 2 different organizations, and I was doing that at the same time as, being an intern at Lockheed and being able to balance being a full-time student. So just being able to manage all that at the same time is ultimately what I believe helped me stand out. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I will talk a little bit about what I did at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And to provide more context, for those of you who don't know, NASA has 10 centers and they have a few testing facilities outside of that. So at NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, it's the home of human spaceflight, and it's where a mission control center is that directly runs the operations of the International Space Station. So, EVAs, extravehicular activities, which are just spacewalks, is run in, and of course, anything else that happens in the International Space Station happens in Houston. And of course, that's where all the astronauts live, because that's where the neutral buoyancy lab is. So we can go to the next slide, please. So my first internship was working lithium ion batteries for the International Space Station. And as well as for the Boeing Starliner. So basically what did I do? We would run sidewall rupture tests. So basically they're tests where we test where does the lithium ion battery, when it heats up, it goes into what we call a thermal runaway event, which is basically just a fire. So what NASA's fractional thermal runaway calorimetry team does essentially is they want to control that explosion, and they want it to explode through the top of the battery, not through the side, because if it hits the side of the battery, then it propagates to the adjacent cells. And then it becomes a domino effect that, we don't want that to happen. When we don't want these bad lithium ion battery cells to be on spacecraft and International Space Station. So we do the testing on the ground. So if you go to the next slide, please. I'll briefly talk about this slide. It's another video slide, but I can definitely just talk you through it. So basically the NASA RoboSimian is a prime example of lithium ion batteries gone wrong. So that right there, what you see is a rover, or excuse me, is the RoboSimian. They left it to charge during lunch, and essentially, while they left it charging, the RoboSimian, it went into, the lithium ion batteries went into a thermal runaway state. So they actually caused a fire. And there was actually an intern nearby who was not related to the project at all. And he actually was forced into the situation where he had to put out the fire as best as he could. But I can tell you from doing my emergency response training, there's different fire extinguishers for different types of fires. So like a CO2 fire extinguisher is not going to put out a fire that's being driven by methane combustion. So that was an example of, there's many examples like this, like the Boeing 737, the Tesla superchargers. They are all ran through lithium ion batteries, the Samsung Galaxy Note 7. So those thermal runaway events are caused because lithium ion batteries are very energy dense. So we can go to the next slide, please. This is just one prime example of where we use the lithium ion batteries. This is the Boeing Starliner. And the Boeing Starliner is going to be crew rated. So the next Starliner launch is actually going to carry a crew on it. And it's going to be Boeing's first crewed Starliner launch. So those lithium ion batteries definitely are a key driver to the power system. So we can go to the next slide, please. I'll talk about what I did during this summer, where I worked on propulsion systems. So I had shifted teams. And so how did I get this second internship at NASA? Essentially, I directly messaged many of the branch chiefs that I wanted to work with, and most of them didn't really have openings for the summer. But when you message 30 or 40 people, your odds increase. It's just a numbers game. So that's how I got my summer internship. So I designed, essentially, I wrote a Python script to be able to plot out data in real time, pressure and temperature data in real time during static fire tests for NASA's Morpheus vehicle. So if we go to the next slide, please. This video, essentially, I'll just kind of talk through it, is Morpheus's first test flight. So this test flight actually didn't really go that well. It lifts off the ground for like 2 seconds, and then it immediately, the reaction control system thrusters control the attitude of it. So the pitch of it while it's in the air. So they didn't fire, and what ended up happening was the Morpheus vehicle actually tilted on its side, and it actually came back down to the ground, and the tank exploded. So obviously, that's why we test. So we can go to the next slide, please. I'll talk about, learning from our mistakes. This was the first successful free test flight in this video. So the Morpheus vehicle flies at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and essentially it takes off. This is a 2-minute video that basically it simulates the whole entire mission. So Morpheus, it takes off vertically. It hovers about up to 200 meters in altitude, and then it comes back down and it does its propulsive landing. So yeah, that's what I worked on during the summer. So we can go to the next slide, please. I'll talk about how did I then transition over into SpaceX. So believe it or not, I actually did see the announcement on Instagram. And the reason I saw this is because I follow a lot of science and space communicators on Instagram. So the information that I guess I selected to choose, because you can choose who you follow and you can select the type of information you wish to receive. So, I'm a big space enthusiast. So I follow a lot of space accounts. So one of them reposted a story that someone else was hiring. They're hiring one intern for the fall semester. And really, I wanted the opportunity to just interview with SpaceX because I had heard about their technical interviews. One of my coworkers on the lithium-ion battery team interviewed with SpaceX, and I got the opportunity to learn about his questions. And the interviews are very technical. So, I just thought I'd throw my name in the ringer, and I messaged the guy. I sent him an email. I sent him my portfolios, my resume, and initially, actually, I wasn't going to get the interview because my email had landed in his spam email, and he actually didn't see it. So whenever I followed up with him, like, hey, is there any update on my status of, potentially being selected for an interview? He had told me that there isn't because my email landed in his spam, and I didn't think that was fair because I had gotten him to confirm that, yes, I did receive your resume. So whenever he told me that, and he told me, you would have definitely been selected for an interview, I'll forward your information to this team. But I didn't look at your interview, or I didn't look at your information, so I'm not able to give you an interview. So whenever I talked to him about it, we talked through it, and he did eventually give me the interview. And again, I will emphasize the point of persistence, because if I hadn't been persistent, I wouldn't be here at SpaceX right now. If I hadn't been persistent as to why I didn't get the interview after I had already confirmed with him that he got my information, and he had said that your information, you would have definitely been selected if I was choosing interview candidates. So flashing forward to how the interview was. So the interview for SpaceX was actually pretty technical. So they asked me, fundamental orbital mechanics, first principles. Like how would you explain the orbital mechanics of the International Space Station to a kindergartner, for example? Or, during Artemis 3, HLS, which is the Human Landing System, which is essentially the Starship that's going to land on the moon, on the lunar surface. What is that Starship going to do when it's stationary, while the astronauts are doing a spacewalk or an EVA on the lunar surface? So they asked me those types of questions, very technical questions. How would you solve this problem for us? How would you solve that problem for us? So, getting the call. It's funny enough, I will emphasize the point that I don't live in Orlando, Florida. I live in Arlington, Texas, and they're 2,000 kilometers away from each other. But I had actually gone to Orlando, Florida to see the Artemis launch attempt back in the first week of September. This was the second attempt, and it was scrubbed again. So I was actually in the airport when I got the call. So it's funny enough that I get the same call, or I get the same call in this, or different call, but in the same location where I'm not actually from. So yeah, I had gotten the call, and I was pretty excited about it. And of course, I didn't expect to, like I said, I really only just wanted the opportunity to interview with SpaceX, because I wanted to test my interviewing skills. And I was actually doing school full time. But ultimately, I had to move out to Los Angeles, California, which is 2,000 miles on the west coast of the United States. And ultimately, like, I had to just work full time at SpaceX. So yeah. So how did I stand out? I would definitely say being persistent helped me get my interview, because if I wasn't persistent, I wouldn't have gotten the interview. And even the person who ended up hiring me told me, one of the reasons you got the interview was because of how persistent you were. And of course, I had portfolios and I had my resume as well as different portfolios of my previous work at NASA and the rover team and all that. I had that documented. So whenever I sent that in, it gave them a much better picture of who I was. And ultimately, of course, having prior NASA experience is what helped me stand out at SpaceX. So we can go to the next slide, please. I can briefly talk about, what do I do at SpaceX? So I do work on the HLS mission management team for Artemis 3. So like, as I did mention, HLS is going to be the Starship that lands on the moon. So just briefly, my team is in charge of managing the mission from start to finish. So we interface a lot with NASA, and just to provide context of the mission profile that you see on your screen, starting from the left-hand side, the tankers and the storage depot and HLS all launched. So these are basically different variants of Starship, but they're all attached to the same super heavy booster, and they launch into low Earth orbit. So in low Earth orbit, the 4 tankers and the storage depot do their orbital refueling, because Starship is already pretty ginormous, and so they don't want to carry all the propellant with them from the ground. And if they didn't refuel in orbit, Starship would essentially have to be bigger than what it already is. 33 Raptor engines, it's pretty massive, like 16 million pounds of thrust, to which, to provide context, is twice as much as what SLS is, the Space Launch System. So essentially, the Starship tankers, they refuel in low Earth orbit, and then the storage depot, once it's fueled with propellant, it reaches a higher point in low Earth orbit, and then it refuels HLS. And then once HLS is fully fueled, it then does its translunar injection burn, and then that's where, at the same time, NASA launches their Orion capsule, and Orion and HLS, they dock with each other, and then the crew goes from Orion to HLS, and then ultimately HLS lands on the moon. HLS stays on the moon for a couple of days, and then HLS ascends off the moon, and then the crew returns back to Orion, and Orion takes the crew home. And HLS is not designed to be reused, so we lose HLS. But that's essentially what my team is in charge of, is essentially this mission for Artemis 3 that, it's going to happen hopefully no sooner than 4 years from now. So we just had Artemis 1 launch of like 2 weeks ago. So yeah, that's what my work concludes at SpaceX. So now, if we can go to the next slide, please. I do want to briefly just talk and give a few tips as to what's helped me out a lot. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I do want to emphasize a lot that, failure is a big part of success. So originally, when I had applied to the University of Texas at Arlington, I did get rejected due to my low SAT scores, finishing in the bottom half of my high school class. But then I appealed. And when I appealed, I went through the committee. They eventually did accept me. So it goes to the same principle of, being perseverant. But of course, when I entered UTA, I didn't have any scholarships because I was one of those kids that had to appeal to get in. So I had to work through all of college. I started in the lower level math class for engineers, which is college algebra, because most engineering students start in calculus 1, and I had started in college algebra. But I just worked each problem and I didn't get discouraged, and persistence has always paid off. So, fail often, fail early, and fail forward. So what does fail forward mean? It basically means, don't repeat your mistakes. Learn from your failures and use your failures to be able to, move towards the right direction. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I do want to provide a little bit of tips from my experience as to, how to get an internship while you're in college so you can then have a job lined up once you leave college. So the first thing I will say is create a portfolio. So a portfolio is essentially, like I mentioned, if you're excuse me, if you're a mechanical engineer, sorry. Okay. Sorry. Okay. If you're a mechanical engineer, create a portfolio of CAD renderings of your research, of your class projects, and you show a picture of your work. So that's essentially a portfolio. It provides a presentation of who you are. Undergraduate research with a professor. This is very important, especially if you're trying to do grad school. So you learn a lot of technical experience, you get research experience, and a lot of interns at NASA, SpaceX, Lockheed, they come with undergraduate research experience. So next, a professional development student organization. So these organizations help you with your resume, your interview skills, preparing for that, and joining a technical organization like the rover team, the rocket team. If you're a computer science major and you like app development, like joining a mobile app development team will definitely for sure help you. If you get professional certifications in your field, for example, I'm a mechanical engineer, so SolidWorks, for example, is a computer-aided design software. So I took the certification exam to, not just say on my resume, like, hey, I know how to use SolidWorks, but also here's a certification to prove it. So proving your technical competency. And of course, take on leadership roles in your student organizations. And again, I do want to emphasize, find what you love, because like I said, student orgs have like 100 people, but there's only one president, there's only one vice president. So do what you love, because sometimes contributing, for example, if you love social media, you'd probably be good on the marketing team, or if you love money and handling financial task, then you'd probably make a good treasurer. Or if you don't really like talking to people, you could make a good secretary and take notes, which is super important as well. So find what you love And the combination of these is lethal. I can tell you for sure, whenever I worked at NASA and at SpaceX, a lot of people had at least two of these. So they were part of a technical organization, but they also had undergraduate research. Or if they didn't, they offset it by having professional development research. So the combination of these is very effective. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I want to talk about some life lessons that I've learned from my time, coming from, growing up for a bit in a foreign country, and then, kind of just going through different job opportunities that I've had, from customer service to working at Lockheed, then NASA, then SpaceX. You are the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. So, I'm sure you've heard the saying, birds of a feather flock together. And that couldn't be more true. So if you surround yourself with positive people and surround yourself with people who hold you accountable, and not just people who uplift you, but not just people who tell you what you want to hear, because that's also very important as well. And of course, you can't control everything that life throws at you. We're all dealt different hands and cards in life, but you have complete control over your attitude. And I think your attitude says a lot about you. When things go your way, it's very easy to have a good attitude, but how's your attitude when things don't go your way? And things are not going to go your way 100% of the time. So your attitude is everything. Failure is normal. Try the things that scare you. So essentially, go out of your comfort zone, do things that you don't know if you're going to succeed at, because in the process, you're going to find out things about yourself, and you're going to learn skills that you didn't think you would learn if you hadn't otherwise taken the action to step out of your comfort zone. And of course, actions do speak louder than words. So people remember what you do. People remember, people will believe your results more than they believe what you say. So actions do speak louder than words. And this next one's actually one of my favorites: aim to be a 0. So I'm not going to take any credit for this one. This one, I got it straight out of Chris Hadfield's book of An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. And for those of you who don't know who Chris Hadfield is, he's a Canadian. He's a former Canadian Space Agency astronaut. And he flew to space 3 times. And the 3rd time he flew, he was actually commander of the International Space Station. He's the first and the only Canadian to have done that. So basically, aiming to be a 0 essentially means whenever you join a team, or you're contributing to a project or whatever, don't try to be the person that tries to go above and beyond to stand out. Try to be the person that doesn't take away value. So a +1 is someone who adds value. A 0 is someone who doesn't add or take away value. And a -1 is someone who takes away value. So when you aim to be a 0, you do the little things right. And, you just make sure you don't make anything worse than what it is. And he mentions a story of Thomas Marshburn, which is also an astronaut who actually recently retired like this week. And I think he's joining KCL Space. But essentially, Thomas Marshburn hiked the Pacific Northwest in the United States. He hiked that journey, I think it was by himself, and he hiked more than a marathon a day. So obviously this guy has expeditionary experience. So whenever they did their survival training, their wilderness training for their mission, what Chris Hadfield really remembers that he thought was very remarkable about astronaut Thomas Marshburn was that Thomas Marshburn, despite the fact that he had this experience, he didn't go above and beyond to showcase his skills. He kind of just took a back seat, and whenever they needed his help, he would help, but he didn't try to make it a point that, hey, I've done this, I'm the one that's going to lead this. So aim to be a 0. Pursue your passions. Like I said, do something that you love, because you're going to be a lot better at it than if you do something that you don't enjoy. Dream big. Don't tell yourself no. So, keep your dreams big, and most importantly, have fun. And if we go to the next slide, please. I leave y'all with this quote. I am and never will be a White Sox pocket protector, nerdy engineer, born under the second law of thermodynamics, steeped in steam tables, in love with free body diagrams, transformed by Laplace, and propelled by compressible flow. This book comes straight out of the last chapter of Neil Armstrong's biography, First Man. I just thought this is my favorite quote. I don't really have any sentimental value to it other than this is a quote that has stuck with me forever, ever since I read the book. So with that, we can go to the last slide, please. And I'm here to take any questions that y'all may have. So thank y'all again for listening to me. And again, it was an honor to speak to King's College of London. Y'all are doing really great things. So thank y'all for having me.
Thank you so much as well for giving that amazing talk. It's been really, really insightful to be able to hear how you managed to get to SpaceX and how you managed to get to NASA as well. I mean, most people find it quite difficult. I mean, when you think, internship at NASA, you think impossible, but you just proved that the impossible can be possible. And I think that's amazing to hear. Maybe not especially for us as UK citizens, but perhaps later on down the line. I'll stop sharing now. And has anyone in the chat asked any questions yet? Or would like to ask a question? Now's the opportunity to do so. Yeah, so in terms of the recordings, I'm recording the session, and the recordings will be saved onto the YouTube channel, KCL Space's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to access it from there, and we'll send you guys messages on our Instagram and emails with the link later on. So yeah, you can access it from there. Okay, we have one question. It wasn't really a question. It's just Edward says, opinion of Elon Musk.
Oh, that's a good one. So I guess a good opinion of Elon, because I know there's a lot of mixed opinions about him. I would just say that, Elon and SpaceX, Elon wouldn't be where he is if he didn't dare to do what was deemed the impossible of starting a commercial spaceflight program. So yeah, when you read his book, you find out that he is pretty much a workaholic. Like, he lives and breathes his mission, and he lives and breathes that, and he has the same expectations for the people that work with him. So I guess my opinion is that he wouldn't be where he is if he didn't dare to try it. So yeah. It's my boss.
I'm guessing you can't really say a lot of bad things about him.
Yeah, I've heard about him, but that's my personal opinion.
I've got a quick question, if that's possible. So this year I'm the co-head of the rocketry team, and the King's rocketry team was relatively underdeveloped in the past. And this team, we've got a really passionate and energetic team that's planning to revive the rocketry team at King's. Do you have any advice or suggestions that you could give the team in terms of technically, or just something motivational as a team that's trying to push their limits this year?
Yeah, so I've been in the situation where for the SHIP organization, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, when I first became an officer, I became an officer when the organization was essentially dead, in air quotes, during COVID. But we managed to revive the chapter, and we actually got selected as a national chapter of the year. So we went from essentially being dead, in air quotes, to being a national chapter of the year, and that came with having very committed individuals. So just make sure that the individuals that are on the team are very committed to the mission, and they're willing to put in the time it takes to have the rocket team reach the goals that it wants to reach. And of course, any opportunities you seek out to talk to companies or talk to competitions that you can participate in is essentially going to move the organization forward. So yeah, that's my advice.
We have some more questions in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
When working at SpaceX, did you ever get the chance to meet Elon Musk?
Yeah, so I always get that question. So SpaceX has multiple sites, of course, just like NASA does. And I haven't actually had the chance to meet with them. I've met Gwen Shotwell, which is the COO, the chief operating officer, and she's the person that reports directly to Elon Musk. She's basically like, she basically runs SpaceX because Elon, has to divide his attention between his other companies. But Elon spends the majority of his time in Starbase, which is in Boca Chica, Texas, which is probably around 2,000 kilometers away from where I am in Los Angeles, because I work in the SpaceX headquarters in Los Angeles, or in Hawthorne, California, which is basically, we're like 10 minutes away from LA. But no, I haven't met Elon because, like I said, that man's pretty busy. And he really, he can be found mainly at Starbase working on Starship, or during a launch, he could be found at the Cape and Cape Canaveral, Florida. But yeah, I haven't really met him because he doesn't really spend much time here in Hawthorne, California. So yeah.
Nice. Sayla also wrote on the chat, do you have any advice for students who do not have a STEM background currently who wishes to enter the space related industry?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak for NASA. But ESA is essentially NASA's equivalent in Europe. So I'm sure a lot of what I'm saying could also apply for ESA's principles. But NASA isn't just aerospace engineers, and that's something I learned, because I feel like there's a big misconception that you have to be an aerospace engineer to work at NASA. But NASA has everything. They have biomedical engineers, they have scientists, and these are things that aren't super advertised. And they also have a lot of marketing. They have a whole business team that operates their billion-dollar budgets with the government, and I'm sure ESA has the same. So there's definitely room for space. But one thing that I will say is I've met people that don't have STEM backgrounds. They don't have STEM backgrounds, but they work at NASA. So how do they do that? So they had something STEM related, in the sense of, for example, maybe they drew, maybe they know how to operate a drone, or they ran their drone club, or they got their L1 rocket certification, but they weren't necessarily, aerospace engineers. They were coming from a financial or a marketing background, but they had that technical experience, or they had a certification to prove it. So there's definitely opportunities. I'm sure there's opportunities in NASA, and I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities as well in ESA as well. So yeah, there's definitely room, even if you're not a STEM major. Space needs everyone's support. So yeah.
Brilliant. We have another question. What's the difference between the portfolio and a resume?
Yeah, so a resume is just a bunch of words, essentially. So you have your, where you worked, blah, 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 what you do, who you are, your grade point average, all that. A portfolio has, I think this was right in the video where I was actually choking up. So I didn't get into too much details, but essentially a portfolio is an extension of your resume. So if I'm telling you on my resume, hey, I was on the rover team and I designed the end effector, which is the gripper. On my portfolio, I'll have those bullets, but then I'll also have pictures of, this is the gripper, this is the CAD rendering of the gripper, and this is the same CAD rendering, but this is printed out in plastic or PLA or nylon. So this is the same CAD model, but now it's printed out. This is the gripper holding a screwdriver. This is the sample return drilling into the ground. This is a sample return CAD model. This is a simulation that I ran. Here's the thermal map. Or here's I claim on my resume that I helped to lead some outreach events. So here's an event here's a picture of me at that outreach event, or here's a picture of me volunteering, or here's a picture of the constitutional bylaws that I specifically changed. So that's essentially what a portfolio is. So you have a project and you provide a visual of it, and portfolios are multiple pages versus your resume. A lot of times for undergrads are usually just one page. Of course, if you have research experience or you have publications to your name, then it could definitely for the most part, a resume is one page, and a portfolio is multiple pages with graphics. So essentially, a portfolio is just an extension of who you are, with pictures and visuals. So yeah.
I also have a question. Is when you mentioned that you did the interview, and they asked you for how would you deal with difficulty? You said you were good at managing your time as a full-time student and plus an intern and other things. So how would you be able to manage your time? Like, could you give a bit more information on how you'd be able to manage being a full-time student and with other commitments as well?
Yeah. So the way I answered this question in the interview was, I highlighted that because you have to think about how do a company employees manage their time, and a lot of times they use Gantt charts or they use calendars, so they see dates ahead of time, so they know what to expect. So that's essentially what I had said, because I do use Gantt charts, so I know exactly how much time I expect to spend on each task. And whenever I mentioned that, I had let my interviewer know that, I know y'all use Gantt charts as well to keep keep milestones and projects on schedule. So the way I manage my time is the same way you manage your time. So that's kind of the way I answered the question. So something, not just saying like, oh, I write things down, or but I use a software to help me keep track of time is a much more clear answer than just saying like, oh, I wrote it down and prepared. So you want to be very specific whenever you answer those types of questions.
Would they ask you which software, and in which case, which software did you use?
Yeah, so Excel. So it's pretty simple. Excel has a Gantt chart template, so that's what I mentioned. And Excel's used a lot in industry, so it's no special fancy software.
Okay. Is there any more questions on the chat?
Someone asked a question about Oumuamua, I think. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right. It's the first interstellar object detected passing through the solar system in 2017.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas about it?
Yeah, so thanks for educating me on that, because I actually don't know too much about. I mean, I know Voyager has crossed into interstellar space, but I don't know too much about it. Like I said, I'm a firm believer that there's overwhelming odds there's life out there in the universe, because the universe is, it's mind-blowingly big. So there's overwhelming odds that there's some form of life somewhere. And, it took Earth about, like, I think 200 million years or so to be able to go from single cells to, fully multi-cell complex organisms. So I do believe there is life somewhere. But as far as what Voyager detected, I don't know too much about that, because I didn't work on any Voyager project, because Voyager launched like decades ago. But I definitely, it's something that I should definitely keep up with more.
And I have another question, actually. It's
Yes.
regarding the future. So now that you're at SpaceX, what are your future plans? Are you planning to stay in SpaceX? Are you planning, I know you mentioned you're an aspiring astronaut, but what are you doing for that? Are you doing any like courses, training, or what kind of things you're preparing yourself for that as well? So it's a big question, but it's a bit vague, so you can go into it a bit more.
Yeah, so that's actually a really great question. So as far as my future plans, I'm actually still in school, just like y'all. So I do plan to complete my degrees. And as far as like answering your question about like being an aspiring astronaut, so I learned from Chris Hadfield's book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, is he gives the best piece of advice, and I can't emphasize it enough. Like, do something you love. Do something you're passionate about. Like I said, I had the opportunity when I was at Johnson Space Center to meet many astronauts, and they all give the same piece of advice: is find something you're really passionate about, because for one, you'll like it and you'll be a lot better at it than if you're not passionate about it. So I would say, do something that if you were never to become an astronaut, you would be very happy doing it. Don't do something just to become an astronaut. Like I know, like a good example is like a lot of astronauts, like, you know, the International Space Station is half American and it's half Russian. So astronauts have to learn Russian. So, you know, if you're a person and you would learn Russian regardless of whether you become an astronaut or not, then you go on and learn Russian. But like if you're only doing it for the very slim chance of becoming an astronaut, I would say, you know, do something that you really enjoy. So that's probably my best advice is, you know, I plan to, I don't know if I'll be at NASA or at SpaceX or anywhere else. But what I do plan to do is I plan to find things that I really, really enjoy. And I plan to pursue that. And, you know, maybe the opportunity comes and, you know, maybe I develop a skill set that can be transferable to, you know, maybe operating in Gateway or operating like, you know, for whatever the astronaut corps needs at the time. But yeah, that's probably my best, my game plan, I guess. Just find something I really love and just, you know, enjoy it. And, you know, if the opportunity comes, I'll be more than happy for it. But if it doesn't, you know, I'll be just as fulfilled.
That's brilliant. Does anyone have any more questions from the chat? You can ask now. Or if you're not sure yet and you have your question later, you can always ask us. KCL Space can email us, send us a message on Instagram or something. We'll try and get in touch and we'll let you know what he says later on. But does anyone from the committee have a question? No, I think you pretty much covered everything. If we do have any more questions, we'll definitely be in touch. And I got to say thank you so much for taking your time out to join this session. I know it's difficult with the time differences and everything.
Yeah, no. And
yeah, so it's like 8:30 over here in nighttime. So I want
yeah,
to thank everyone else on the chat for coming as well. I know it's difficult lectures and people are full-time students, but the fact that they're all here and they want to hear you talk just shows that they are interested. And I hope they found it interesting. Please let us know if it wasn't. But yeah, thank you so much for coming along, giving us a talk. I definitely learned a lot. And I'd finish off with one last question. What would be your favorite sci-fi movie / book that you've ever read / watched?
Oh, so I haven't actually, I read a lot of nonfiction, so I haven't read that much sci-fi books, but like I've definitely watched sci-fi movies, and I would say Interstellar is definitely what initially like motivated me to like start, you know, thinking more about space. So yeah, that's my favorite sci-fi movie.
Brilliant. It's my favorite as well, so that's brilliant. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. And on behalf of all the KCL Space as well, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me. And, you know, it was an honor to speak to King's College London. You know, I look forward to seeing all the amazing things that y'all do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.